Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a question that has followed humanity for as long as we have closed our eyes and drifted into sleep. Where does your consciousness go when you're no longer awake? But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable, and when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine, let it drift. We'll still be here quietly unfolding the story. Tonight, we're not rushing toward answers. We're simply going to follow a question, slowly, carefully, like watching ripples spread across still water. Every night, without fail, you go somewhere. You lie down. Your body softens. Your breathing slows. The world around you begins to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, like a room dimming as the lights are lowered. And then, at some point you never quite remember, you are gone. Not gone in the sense of disappearing forever, but gone from here. Gone from this room, this bed, this familiar place you call reality. And yet, something continues, because a few hours later, you return. You wake up, perhaps with fragments of strange images, a conversation that never happened, a place that doesn't exist, a feeling that lingers just beyond language, or sometimes nothing at all, just the quiet sense that time has passed, without you. And this is where the question begins to unfold. If your body stayed here the entire time, then where were you? It is tempting to say that nothing happened, that sleep is simply a pause, a blank space between two waking moments, like turning off a light and then turning it back on again. But that isn't quite true, because if you listen closely, if you pay attention to the edges of your own experience, you might notice something subtle. Sleep does not feel like nothing. It feels like slipping, like drifting, like crossing something, without quite knowing what it is. Think of those moments just before you fall asleep. Perhaps you felt them before. Your thoughts begin to loosen. Images appear without effort. You might hear a voice, or see a scene, or feel as though you're falling gently through space. And then suddenly, you're somewhere else. Not physically, of course. Your body hasn't moved. But your experience has changed completely. You're no longer lying in your bed. You're inside something. World constructed entirely from within, yet somehow vivid enough to feel real. And here is something quietly remarkable. While you're in that place, you rarely question it. You might be flying above a city, or walking through a house you've never seen, or speaking to someone who hasn't been part of your life for years, and yet in that moment it all feels natural, coherent, true. It is only when you wake that the strangeness reveals itself. This suggests something important. Your sense of reality is not fixed. It is something your mind creates, moment by moment. And during sleep, that creation continues, but under very different rules. Now science has spent decades studying what happens in the brain during sleep. Researchers have observed patterns of activity, rhythms that rise and fall, regions that become more or less active depending on the stage of sleep. They can tell us, with remarkable precision, when you are dreaming, when your body is deeply at rest, and even when your brain is replaying fragments of your day. But there is a quiet boundary they have not yet crossed. They can describe what the brain is doing, but they cannot fully explain what you're experiencing. because experience, the feeling of being somewhere, seeing something, sensing a presence, is not easily measured. It does not appear directly on a scan or a graph. It exists only from the inside, and this is where things begin to become interesting. Because across history, long before brain scans and sleep laboratories, people have tried to describe this same journey in very different ways. Some said the soul leaves the body and travels. Others believed dreams were messages from another realm. Some traditions described entire landscapes, places you visit again and again, though you cannot always remember them clearly. And even today, in quiet corners of the world, there are those who still speak of sleep not as rest, but as a kind of movement, a passage, a crossing. Now, whether any of these interpretations are literally true is not something we need to decide tonight. What matters is something much simpler. Every night, your experience changes in a way that is profound, consistent, and still not fully understood. You move from a world governed by physical rules into one governed by something else entirely, a place where time stretches and folds, where identity becomes fluid, where logic softens and imagination takes the lead. And perhaps, most intriguingly of all, a place where you continue to exist, even when the version of you that you call yourself begins to fade. So tonight, as we begin this exploration, we're not trying to prove that your consciousness travels somewhere beyond the body, and we're not trying to dismiss it as mere illusion either. Instead, we're going to do something quieter. We're going to observe, to notice, to gently follow the path your awareness takes, from waking into sleep and beyond, because sometimes understanding does not come from forcing an answer. Sometimes it comes from learning how to look a little more carefully. And as you settle in, perhaps already feeling your body relax just a little more into the surface beneath you, you might begin to sense it, that subtle shift, that quiet movement inward, like the first step of a journey you've taken thousands of times, but never fully remembered. And tonight, we're simply going to walk a little closer to that doorway. As you continue to settle into this quiet space, there is a moment, so small, so easy to miss, that happens every single night. It is not the moment you fall asleep. It comes just before that, a gentle loosening, a soft unravelling of the world you were just holding on to. You may have felt it before, though perhaps you never stopped to notice it clearly. You are lying there, aware of the room, aware of your body, aware of your thoughts, and then, without warning, something shifts. Your thoughts begin to drift, no longer forming in straight lines. Images appear without invitation. A voice, perhaps your own, speaks in fragments, and then, suddenly, a strange sensation, a falling, a floating, a brief jolt, as if your body remembered gravity just a second too late, and just like that, you're no longer fully here. Science gives this moment a name, though we will keep it gentle. It is often called the first stage of sleep, a transitional phase where the mind begins to let go of the external world and turn inward. But rather than thinking of it as a stage, it may feel more natural to imagine it as a shoreline. Behind you is the solid ground of waking life. Ahead of you, something less defined. And for a few quiet moments, you're standing right at the edge. In this space, your awareness behaves in unusual ways. You might still hear sounds from the outside, a distant car, a shifting blanket, a faint hum in the room. But those sounds begin to lose their importance. They no longer anchor you. Instead, your attention begins to follow something else, an inner current. Thoughts become softer, less controlled. They don't ask for your permission anymore. They simply appear and then disappear again, like clouds drifting across a quiet sky. Sometimes these thoughts turn into images, Not fully formed dreams, but brief flashes, a face you recognize, a place that feels familiar but isn't quite real. A moment that seems to begin in the middle, without context. If you've ever found yourself half asleep on a couch, only to suddenly jerk awake as if you were falling, you've already visited this place. That sudden movement, often surprising, sometimes even a little alarming, is simply your body reacting to the shift. Your mind has begun to let go. Your body for just a moment follows, and then it catches itself. But here is something worth noticing. That falling sensation, it doesn't feel like imagination, it feels like movement. Not across space in the way you move through a room, but a different kind of movement. A slipping away from something stable into something unknown. It is as if your awareness is no longer fully attached to the physical world. Now, from a scientific perspective, we can describe part of what is happening. The patterns of activity in your brain begin to slow. The fast, active rhythms of waking life soften into slower, more fluid patterns. Your muscles relax. Your breathing becomes steady. But rather than focusing on those details, it may be more helpful to imagine what this feels like from the inside. It is like a conversation fading out. At first, you are fully engaged, aware of every word, every detail. Then gradually the voices become quieter. You stop following the meaning. The structure dissolves, and eventually, there is only silence, but not an empty silence, a waiting silence, because something else is beginning to form beneath it. This transitional space has fascinated people for centuries. Some have described it as the gateway to dreaming. Others have seen it as a doorway into deeper layers of the mind. And in certain traditions, it is considered one of the most important moments of the entire sleep cycle. Not because of what happens there, but because of what it allows. It is the point where control softens, where the boundaries of identity begin to loosen, where the sense of I am here, in this body, in this place, starts to fade. Just enough to let something else emerge. You might think of it like stepping into water. At first, you're standing on solid ground. You feel the cool edge around your feet. You're still fully aware of where you are. Then you take another step. The water rises. Your weight begins to shift. The ground beneath you becomes less certain. And eventually there comes a moment when your feet no longer fully support you. You are no longer standing. You are floating. That moment, the instant where standing becomes floating, is not dramatic. It is quiet, subtle, almost invisible, and yet it changes everything, because once you are floating, you're no longer bound in the same way. Something similar may be happening as you fall asleep. Your awareness, which was once anchored to the physical world, begins to loosen its grip, and as it does, it becomes capable of moving in ways it normally cannot. Now, whether that movement is entirely generated by the brain, or whether it reflects something deeper, is still an open question, but the experience itself is undeniable. You leave one mode of reality and enter another, and you do it so often, so effortlessly, that it has become almost invisible to you. But if you pay attention, just for a moment, you might notice how delicate that crossing really is, how easily it can be interrupted. A sudden noise, a stray thought, a shift in position, and just like that, you're pulled back onto solid ground, back into the familiar structure of waking awareness, which suggests something rather interesting. This threshold, this quiet edge between worlds, is not a fixed place. It is a balance, a delicate state that can tip in either direction, toward wakefulness or towards something else entirely. And as the night deepens and your mind continues to drift further from the surface of the waking world, that something else begins to take shape more fully. not just as fragments, not just as fleeting impressions, but as entire environments, entire experiences, worlds that feel in their own way just as real as this one. And as we move forward, we will begin to explore what happens next, not as your awareness fades away, but as it reorganizes itself into something entirely different. Because what waits beyond this threshold is not emptiness, it is structure, it is activity, it is in many ways another kind of reality. As that gentle crossing settles behind you, something remarkable begins to unfold, not all at once, but in a quiet, repeating rhythm that carries you through the night. Sleep, despite how it feels, is not a single continuous state. It is not a long, uninterrupted darkness. Instead, it is more like a slow, looping journey, one that your mind and body repeat again and again, each cycle bringing you a little deeper and then gently lifting you back toward the surface before descending once more. If you could watch this process from the outside, not as a sleeper, but as an observer, you might see it as a kind of architecture, a structure, a carefully arranged sequence unfolding in layers, and each layer has its own role, its own texture, its own quiet purpose. Let's imagine it not as a series of technical stages, but as a descent through a building, one floor at a time. You've already stepped through the entrance, the threshold we explored earlier, that soft drifting moment where waking begins to loosen its grip. Now you move a little further inside. The first level is light and delicate. You're not fully asleep, and yet you're no longer fully awake. Sounds from the outside world still reach you, but they feel distant, softened, as if wrapped in fabric. Your thoughts continue to wander, but they no longer follow clear paths. They curve, they dissolve, they reform in unexpected ways. It is here that your awareness begins to turn inward more fully, and then, without any clear boundary, you move deeper. This next layer is where most of your night is quietly spent, though few people realize it. Your body becomes more still. Your breathing finds a steady rhythm. Your temperature drops slightly, as if the world inside you is dimming its lights. And within your mind, something curious happens. From time to time, there are small bursts of activity, brief, sudden flickers that ripple through your brain. Not chaotic, not disruptive, but purposeful, like soft pulses of energy appearing and fading. You might imagine them as gentle taps on the glass of your awareness, helping to keep you asleep, shielding you from disturbances, maintaining the calm. If a sound occurs in the distance, a door closing, a voice in another room, these quiet pulses help soften its impact, allowing you to remain in this resting state. It is as if your mind is quietly standing guard, not to keep you awake, but to protect your rest. You spend a surprising amount of time here, not in the vivid landscapes of dreams, not in the deep stillness of the lowest levels, but in this calm, balanced middle ground. And then, gradually, you descend again. This next level feels different, heavier, deeper, more distant from the surface. If someone were to try to wake you now, it would take effort. Your connection to the outside world has thinned to almost nothing. Your mind is no longer producing clear images or stories. Instead, it moves slowly, like waves rolling across a quiet sea. This is where your body begins its most essential work. Not dramatic work, not visible work, but necessary work. Tiny repairs take place across your system. Muscles recover, cells restore themselves, your immune system strengthens, quietly preparing for whatever tomorrow may bring. And within your brain, something even more subtle is happening. Imagine a city at night. During the day, it is full of movement, cars, people, activity flowing through every street. But late at night, when the traffic fades, something else begins. Cleaning, maintenance. The streets are cleared, debris is removed, systems are reset. Your brain does something similar. While you rest, it takes advantage of the quiet to clear away the build-up of the day. Not thoughts, exactly, but the byproducts of constant activity. Tiny remnants that need to be washed away to keep everything functioning smoothly. It is a kind of renewal, a quiet reset, and without it, things begin to slow, to blur, to lose clarity. But this deep level does not last forever. After some time, something shifts again. You begin to rise, not fully back to waking, but upward, through the layers you passed before, and then you arrive somewhere very different. This is the part of sleep most people recognize, even if they don't always remember it. Your mind becomes active once more, but not in the structured, logical way it was during the day. This activity is fluid, unbounded, creative. Your eyes move beneath your closed lids as if following something only you can see. Your breathing changes, becoming less steady. Your heart responds, quickening slightly, as if reacting to something unfolding inside. And yet, your body remains still, completely still. It is as if your mind has come alive while your body has stepped aside. There is a reason for this stillness, because what happens in this phase can be so vivid, so immersive, that if your body were free to move, it might attempt to follow along, running, reaching, reacting to things that are not physically present. So instead, your body rests in place, while your experience unfolds elsewhere. This is the phase where dreams begin to take shape in their fullest form, not just fragments, not just impressions, but entire scenes, stories, encounters. And what is perhaps most fascinating is how this entire process repeats again and again throughout the night, from light to deep, from deep to dreaming, and back again, each cycle lasting roughly the same amount of time, about an hour and a half, give or take. You move through these layers 4, 5, sometimes 6 times before morning arrives, but something subtle changes with each repetition. Early in the night, the deeper layers last longer. Your body focuses on restoration, on repair. Later, as morning approaches, the dreaming phases stretch out. They become longer, richer, more detailed, which is why, if you wake closer to the morning, your dreams often feel more vivid, more complex, more memorable. You have spent more time in that space, more time immersed in that other way of experiencing. And when you step back from it all, something becomes clear. Sleep is not a simple off switch. It's a carefully orchestrated rhythm, a balance between stillness and activity, between restoration and exploration, between the physical body and something that continues to move even while the body rests. And as we move deeper into this journey, we begin to look more closely at what unfolds in that final phase, the one where your mind becomes vivid, your body remains still, and your experience transforms into something that feels, in its own quiet way, like another world entirely. As the night continues to unfold, and you move once more through the quiet rhythm of sleep, there comes a phase that feels almost like disappearance. Not the gentle drifting we explored before, and not the vivid storytelling of dreams. This is something quieter, heavier, a kind of stillness so complete that from the outside it might seem as though nothing is happening at all. And yet, this is where some of the most important work begins. You have already passed through the lighter layers, your body has settled, your breathing has softened into a steady, effortless rhythm. The world beyond your room has faded so far into the background that it barely touches you anymore. Now you arrive in a place that is often described as deep sleep. But rather than thinking of it as deep, it may be more helpful to imagine it as a kind of inward turning, a retreat, as if your entire system has quietly closed its doors, not to shut down, but to focus entirely on what is happening within. If someone were to try to wake you during this phase, it would not be easy. Your connection to the outside world is faint, almost like a distant echo. Your awareness, as you normally experience it, is not forming clear images or stories. There are no scenes, no conversations, no sense of movement through space, and, because of that, it often feels like nothing. But this nothing is not empty, it is full of quiet processes that sustain you in ways you rarely notice. Your body, for instance, begins to repair itself in small, continuous ways. Tiny tears in muscle fibers are restored. Your immune system strengthens its defenses. Hormones are released, subtle chemical messengers that guide growth, recovery, and balance throughout your system. You're not aware of any of this, and yet it is happening with incredible precision. Like a team of workers entering a building after hours, moving through each room, fixing what needs to be fixed, adjusting what has shifted out of place. No noise, no disruption, just steady, careful work. And within your brain, something equally important is taking place. During the day, your mind is constantly active. Thoughts flow one into another. Sensory input arrives from every direction. Light, sound, movement, language, emotion. It is a busy environment, full of signals and activity. But with that activity comes a kind of build-up. Not visible, not something you can feel directly, but present nonetheless. Small byproducts of constant use, accumulating over time. And this is where the night becomes essential. Because only in this deeper phase, when everything has quieted, does your brain begin a kind of cleansing. You might imagine it like a gentle current flowing through a still landscape. During the day, the streets are crowded. There is no space for maintenance, no time for clearing. But at night, when everything slows, the pathways open, and a quiet system begins to move through your brain, washing away what is no longer needed, restoring balance, creating clarity for the next day. Scientists have given this process a name, though we will keep it soft here. It is often described as the brain's cleaning system, a natural way of clearing away the remnants of daily activity so that your thoughts, your memory, your awareness can remain sharp and functional. Without this nightly process, things begin to change, not all at once, but gradually. You might notice that your thoughts feel heavier, less clear. Your memory becomes less reliable. Your mood shifts in subtle ways, more reactive, less steady. This is not because something has gone wrong. It is simply because the maintenance has been interrupted. The quiet work of the night has not had the chance to complete itself, and over time, that begins to matter. But there is something else about this phase that is easy to overlook, something that is less about the body and more about experience, because in this deep, inward state, your usual sense of self becomes very faint. There are no stories to follow, no images to inhabit. The familiar voice in your mind, the one that narrates, reflects, questions, has gone quiet. If you were to describe this state afterward, you might simply say, "I was asleep." And yet, from another perspective, something very subtle remains. Not thoughts, not identity, but a kind of presence. A background awareness that does not form into anything specific, but does not disappear entirely either. It is difficult to notice because the moment you wake, your mind rushes back in, filling the space with memory and interpretation. But during the state itself, there is a kind of simplicity, a stillness that is not empty, but not defined. Some traditions have spent a great deal of time exploring this particular aspect of sleep. They suggest that in these deeper layers, when the usual sense of self fades, What remains is something more fundamental, not the personality, not the roles you play during the day, but a more basic form of awareness, quiet, unstructured, and perhaps closer to the core of what it means to experience anything at all. Now, from a scientific perspective, this is more difficult to study, because there are no clear images, no behaviors to observe, no stories to analyze, but what can be observed is the pattern of the brain itself. Slow, steady rhythms, large rolling waves of activity that move across the brain like tides across an ocean. These rhythms are very different from the fast, complex patterns of waking life. They are slower, more synchronized, as if different parts of the brain are no longer working independently but together in a shared, unified motion. You might imagine it like a crowd that has stopped speaking individually and begun moving as one. A quiet coordination replacing the constant chatter of the day. And this too may be part of the restoration, not just repairing the body, but bringing the system back into balance, allowing everything to settle into a kind of harmony before the next cycle begins. Because as always, this phase does not last forever. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the depth begins to lighten. The stillness softens, the slow rhythms begin to change, and once again you are carried upward toward a different kind of experience, toward movement, toward imagery, toward the strange and vivid landscapes that begin to form when the mind becomes active again. But before we move there, it is worth pausing, just for a moment, to appreciate this quiet center of the night. This place where nothing seems to happen, and yet everything is being restored. A place where your body rebuilds itself, where your brain clears its pathways, where your sense of self fades into something simpler, something quieter. And perhaps, in that stillness, something essential is being preserved, something that does not need words, or images, or stories, something that simply remains, even when everything else has gone quiet. As the night continues its quiet rhythm and the deep stillness of the previous phase begins to soften, something subtle starts to change again. It does not happen suddenly. There is no clear boundary, no sharp transition, but gradually the heaviness begins to lift, and in its place, a different kind of activity begins to emerge. Your breathing shifts, not dramatically, but enough to feel less steady, less uniform. Your heart responds, adjusting its pace in small, responsive ways, and within your mind, something begins to light up again. If the deeper phase of sleep felt like a calm ocean at night, then what comes next is more like the first flickers of movement beneath the surface. At first, it is gentle, a faint stirring, but soon it becomes something much more vivid. This is the phase often associated with dreaming, a phase where your mind becomes active once more, but in a very different way than when you are awake. Imagine for a moment that your mind is like a theatre. During the day, the stage is filled with structured scenes, conversations, decisions, plans. Everything follows a certain logic guided by your awareness, your intentions. But now, as this phase unfolds, the director quietly steps away. The rules loosen, and the stage becomes something far more fluid. Scenes begin to form without effort. Images appear fully realized. Moments unfold without needing explanation. You're no longer constructing the experience, you're inside it. And what makes this even more remarkable is how real it feels. You might find yourself walking through a place you've never been, yet somehow recognize. You might speak to someone who is no longer part of your life, and in that moment their presence feels completely natural. You might even do things that defy the physical rules of the waking world. Flying, moving effortlessly, shifting from one place to another without transition. And yet, you rarely question it. Because during this phase, the part of your mind that usually evaluates, compares, and asks, "Does this make sense?" becomes much quieter, not absent, but less involved. It is as if the inner voice that keeps everything grounded in logic has stepped back, allowing the experience to unfold freely. At the same time, another part of your mind becomes more active, the part that processes emotion. That gives experiences their intensity, their colour, their significance, which is why dreams often feel so vivid, not just visually, but emotionally. A simple moment can feel deeply meaningful. A small interaction can carry a weight far greater than it would during the day. And yet, while all of this activity is happening within your mind, your body remains completely still, not just relaxed, but intentionally still. There is a natural mechanism in place that prevents your body from acting out what your mind is experiencing. Because if it did not, you might find yourself physically responding to your dreams, reaching, moving, reacting in ways that could disturb your rest or even cause harm. So instead, your body rests quietly, while your inner experience becomes increasingly dynamic. It is a curious contrast. Stillness on the outside, movement on the inside, and this phase does not happen just once. It returns again and again throughout the night. Each time you pass through the earlier layers, light rest, deeper restoration, you eventually rise back into this vivid state. But something changes with each return. At the beginning of the night, this phase is brief, just a few minutes, like dipping your toes into a pool before stepping back. But as the night progresses, it grows longer, richer, more immersive. By the time morning approaches, you may spend extended periods in this state, fully engaged in experiences that feel complete, complex, and deeply real. This is why dreams closer to waking often feel more memorable. You have spent more time within them, more time immersed in that inner world, and because your body is already beginning to prepare for waking, the transition back to awareness is softer, allowing fragments of those experiences to remain. Now, from a scientific perspective, what is happening here is often described in terms of activity patterns within the brain. Different regions become more or less active, creating the conditions for vivid imagery, emotional intensity, and reduced logical filtering. But rather than focusing on those details, it may be more helpful to stay with the experience itself. Because from the inside, this phase feels less like brain activity, and more like entering a different kind of environment. A space where the usual boundaries of reality no longer apply, where time can stretch or compress, where identity can shift, where you can move through scenes that feel continuous, even when they make no sense upon waking. And this raises an interesting question. If your mind can create an experience that feels this real, this complete, this immersive, then what exactly defines reality? Is it the physical consistency of the world around you, or is it the quality of the experience itself? Because while you are dreaming, there is no clear distinction. The experience is simply real. It is only later, when you return to waking life, that you label it as something different, something imagined. But in the moment, there is no difference. And this is where the mystery begins to deepen. Because if your brain can generate a world that feels indistinguishable from waking reality, then the line between internal and external becomes less certain, not erased, but softened, blurred. And perhaps this is why dreams have fascinated people for so long, not just because they are strange or creative, but because they reveal something fundamental about the nature of experience itself, that what you perceive as real is not only determined by what is outside you, but also by how your mind constructs what you experience. And during this phase of sleep, that construction becomes more visible, more fluid, more open to possibility. As the night continues, you will move in and out of this state again and again. Each time your mind will create, explore, and dissolve entire worlds without effort, and by the time morning arrives, most of it will fade quietly away, leaving behind only traces, if anything at all. But even if you do not remember where you went, the journey still happened, the experience still unfolded, and something within you has moved through it, whether you recall it or not. And as we continue, we will begin to look more closely at what these experiences might mean, not just as processes within the brain, but as expressions of something deeper. Because the more we observe this strange, vivid phase of sleep, the more it begins to feel like more than just imagination. By now, you may have noticed something curious about the experiences that unfold during sleep. They are not faint, they are not distant, they are not like watching something far away, as if through a window. Instead, they feel immediate, close, as if you are not observing them, but living inside them. And this raises a quiet, almost unsettling question. Why do dreams feel so real? Because if you think about it, there is no physical world around you during a dream, no actual mountains beneath your feet, no real voices travelling through the air, no external light entering your eyes, and yet you see, you hear, you feel. In some cases you may even smell or taste. The experience is complete. So complete, in fact, that it can be difficult to distinguish from waking life while this is happening. To understand this, it helps to gently shift our perspective. Instead of asking, why do dreams feel real? We might ask something slightly different. What makes anything feel real in the first place? When you're awake, it seems obvious. You look around and the world is there. You touch something and it responds. You hear a sound and it reaches your ears. But what you're actually experiencing is not the world itself. It is your brain's interpretation of signals. Light enters your eyes, is converted into electrical patterns, and those patterns are interpreted as images. Sound vibrations reach your ears, are transformed into signals, and those signals become voices, music, meaning. In other words, even in waking life, you're not directly experiencing reality. You're experiencing a carefully constructed model of it, a version of the world your mind builds for you, moment by moment. And during sleep, something remarkable happens. That construction process continues, but without input from the outside. Instead of building a model based on the external world, your mind begins to generate its own, from memory, from emotion, from fragments of experience rearranged and reimagined. But here is the important part. The same systems that create your waking experience are still active. The same internal tools your mind uses to produce sight, sound, and sensation are still at work. So when you see something in a dream, your brain is not treating it as imaginary. It is processing it in much the same way it would process real input. You're not watching a dream like a movie. You're inside it, experiencing it through the same channels that normally connect you to the physical world. This is why dream imagery can feel so vivid, why colours can appear rich, why spaces can feel expansive, why interactions can carry emotional weight. Because from the brain's perspective, there is no clear distinction. It is simply generating experience. Now, there is one subtle difference. During waking life, there is a constant feedback loop. You see something, you move, the world responds. There is a continuous exchange between your actions and the environment. In dreams, that loop becomes internal. The environment responds, but it is responding to the same system that is creating it. It is as if both the question and the answer are coming from the same place. And this creates a kind of seamless experience, a closed world, one that feels complete, even though it is entirely self-generated. At the same time, the part of your mind that would normally question inconsistencies becomes quieter. The inner voice that might say, "This doesn't make sense," or "This isn't possible," is less active. Not gone entirely, but softened, which allows the experience to continue without interruption. You can move from one place to another without noticing how you got there. You can encounter people who should not be present and accept it without hesitation. You can exist in multiple roles, multiple identities without conflict. And because nothing challenges the experience, it remains stable, convincing, real. Now, there is another layer to this as well: emotion. In dreams, emotions often feel intensified, not necessarily louder, but more direct, more immediate. A simple moment can carry a depth of feeling that surprises you upon waking. A brief interaction can leave a lasting impression, even if the details fade. This is because the emotional systems of the brain remain highly active during this phase. They are not filtered or balanced in the same way as during waking life. So whatever you experience, you feel more fully. And this contributes to the sense of reality, because emotion is one of the strongest signals your mind uses to determine importance. If something feels meaningful, your mind treats it as significant, and if it is significant, it must be real, at least in that moment. So when you combine vivid imagery, reduced logical filtering, and heightened emotion, you create a state where experience becomes deeply immersive, not just believable, but undeniable. And yet, when you wake, something shifts again. The external world returns, your logical mind re-engages, and suddenly, what felt so real begins to dissolve. You recognize the inconsistencies, the impossibilities, the strange transitions that made no sense, and you label it a dream. But this shift tells us something important. The sense of reality is not fixed. It is not tied permanently to one kind of experience. It is something your mind assigns based on how the experience is constructed, which means that during a dream, the reality you're experiencing is not less real in terms of sensation. It is simply generated differently, from within rather than from without. And this leads to a fascinating possibility. If your mind can create experiences that feel indistinguishable from waking life, then perhaps the boundary between real and imagined is not as rigid as it seems. Not because everything's the same, but because the mechanism that produces experience is shared, whether the source is external or internal. So as you drift deeper into the night, moving through these cycles again and again, you're not stepping into something vague or undefined. You're entering a fully formed experiential space, one that feels real because, in every meaningful sense, it is real to you while you are there. And perhaps, rather than asking whether dreams are real or not, a quieter question begins to emerge. What is it exactly that makes any experience feel real at all? As the night continues its quiet unfolding, and you move once more through the vivid landscapes of dreaming, there is something happening beneath the surface of those strange and shifting scenes. Something subtle, something structured, something that, in its own quiet way, connects your dreams directly to your waking life. Because as unusual as dreams can feel, they're not created from nothing. They're built from pieces, fragments of your day, moments you lived through, often without noticing how deeply they were being recorded. A conversation, a passing thought, a place you visited, a feeling you didn't fully process. All of it, collected, stored, waiting. And when you fall asleep, your mind begins to revisit these fragments, not in the same order, not in the same form, but in a way that allows them to be rearranged, reshaped, and understood from a different angle. You might think of it like sorting through a drawer at the end of a long day, During the day, everything is placed inside quickly. Receipts, notes, small objects, ideas. There is no time to organize. But at night, when everything becomes quiet, you open the drawer again, you take things out, you look at them, you decide what to keep, what to move, what to let go. Your mind does something similar. There is a part of your brain, one deeply involved in memory, that becomes especially active during sleep. Rather than introducing it with technical language, it may be easier to imagine it as a kind of librarian. During the day, this librarian collects books, each one representing an experience, a moment, a piece of information. But the library becomes crowded quickly. Shelves fill. New books arrive faster than they can be organized. So at night, the librarian begins to work, quietly, carefully, revisiting what has been gathered, replaying certain moments, strengthening some, letting others fade. This replaying does not happen as a simple repetition. It is not like watching a recording of your day. Instead, it is more like taking pieces from different moments and weaving them together into something new. This is why dreams can feel so strange. You might recognize elements, a face, a place, a situation, but they appear in combinations that never actually occurred. A childhood friend in your current home, a familiar street that suddenly changes into something else, a conversation that feels real but unfolds in unexpected ways. Your mind is not trying to recreate reality exactly. It is experimenting, exploring, testing different ways of connecting what you've experienced. And through this process, something important happens. Memories become more stable, more integrated, less fragile. Things that mattered during the day, things you focused on, repeated, or felt strongly about, are more likely to be reinforced. They are given a place, a kind of permanence, while other details, less important or less relevant, begin to fade, not erased completely, but softened, allowed to drift into the background. This is one of the reasons why sleep is so closely tied to learning. If you spend time practicing something, studying, repeating a skill, engaging deeply with new information, and then you sleep, you often find that the next day it feels easier, more familiar, as if your mind has quietly continued working on it while you were not aware. Because in a sense, it has. But this process is not only about memory, it also touches emotion. Throughout the day, you experience things that carry emotional weight. Some are obvious. A meaningful conversation, a moment of stress, a feeling of joy or disappointment. Others are more subtle. A brief tension, a passing concern, something you did not have time to fully process. And during sleep, especially in the dreaming phases, your mind begins to revisit these emotional experiences, but in a different context, a safer space, one where the intensity can be adjusted, where the experience can be explored without the immediate pressures of the waking world. You might find yourself dreaming about a situation that felt difficult or unresolved. But in the dream, it unfolds differently. You respond in a new way. The outcome changes, or the emotion itself feels altered, less overwhelming, more manageable. It is as if your mind is gently working through what you did not have time to understand fully during the day, not forcing a solution, but allowing space for the experience to settle, to find its place. And this process can be surprisingly creative, because without the strict rules of waking logic, your mind is free to explore possibilities it might not consider otherwise, connections that seem unlikely, perspectives that feel unfamiliar. This is why sometimes people wake with a new idea, a solution to a problem, a shift in understanding that was not available before, not because the answer appeared suddenly, but because the mind had the freedom to explore without limitation, to move through possibilities quietly, without interruption. And yet, despite all this activity, most of it remains hidden. Because the way your brain stores dream experiences is different from how it stores waking memories. The parts of your mind responsible for forming clear, lasting memories are less active during these phases, which means that even though you experience these vivid scenes, these emotional moments, these creative connections, they often fade quickly upon waking, like writing on water, clear for a moment and then gone. Unless you catch them early, unless you pause and gently bring them into awareness before they disappear. But even when you don't remember them, the process still happens. The sorting, the replaying, the integration, quietly shaping how you think, how you feel, how you respond to the world. And this brings us to a deeper realization. Dreams are not just random stories your mind tells for no reason. They are part of a larger process, a way of reorganizing experience, a way of making sense of what has happened, a way of preparing you in subtle ways for what comes next. And yet, even with this understanding, something remains unresolved. Because while we can describe how the brain revisits memory, reshapes emotion, and strengthens learning, there is still the question of experience itself, of what it feels like to be inside those dreams, of why those inner worlds can feel so complete, so immersive, so real. And as we continue, we begin to step beyond memory and emotion into something more mysterious, something that begins to blur the line between what is personal and what might be shared. As your mind continues its gentle rhythm through the night, moving between stillness and vivid experience, there is another layer unfolding beneath everything we've explored so far. It is quieter than memory, more subtle than imagery, but in many ways it may be one of the most important reasons we sleep at all. Because beyond organizing your thoughts, beyond replaying your experiences, your mind is also doing something deeply human. It is working with your emotions. Throughout the day, you feel far more than you have time to understand. Some moments are clear, a burst of joy when something goes right, a sharp tension when something feels uncertain, a wave of frustration or relief or quiet satisfaction. But many emotions do not arrive so clearly. They pass through you quickly, unnoticed or only half recognized. A small discomfort during conversation, a lingering unease you cannot quite explain, a reaction that feels stronger than the situation itself. These experiences do not simply disappear. They remain in a soft and unfinished form, waiting for space, waiting for attention. And during the night, that space finally opens. As you move into the dreaming phases of sleep, the emotional centers of your mind become more active, not in a way that overwhelms you, but in a way that allows feeling to take the lead. At the same time, the systems that would normally create a strong sense of urgency or stress begin to soften. You're no longer in the moment that created the emotion. You're at a distance from it, and that distance matters, because it allows you to revisit what you felt without being fully caught inside it. Imagine, for a moment, watching a scene from your day, but instead of being in the middle of it, reacting, responding, trying to manage everything at once, you're observing it from a step back. You can see it more clearly, feel it more gently, understand it without needing to immediately act. This is, in a sense, what your mind is doing during certain phases of sleep. It returns to emotional experiences, but it changes the context, it reshapes the environment, it softens the intensity just enough to make the experience manageable. You might find yourself in a dream that echoes something from your day, a conversation that feels familiar, a situation that carries the same emotional tone, but the details are different. The setting changes, the outcome shifts. And through this subtle transformation, your mind begins to process what was left unresolved. It is not solving problems in a direct way. It is not presenting clear answers. Instead, it is allowing emotions to move, to unfold, to settle into a more balanced state. This is why, after a night of good sleep, certain feelings may seem lighter, less sharp, less overwhelming. Not gone, but easier to carry, because something has shifted beneath the surface. Something has been integrated. Now, when this process is disrupted, the effects can become noticeable. If you go through a difficult experience, something emotionally intense, and your sleep is interrupted, shortened, or restless, your mind does not have the same opportunity to revisit and process that experience. The emotion remains closer to the surface, less resolved, more reactive. Over time, this can create a kind of accumulation. Moments that have not been fully processed begin to build, and your responses to new situations may become stronger, more immediate, less balanced. This is not a flaw. It is simply the result of a process that has not had the chance to complete itself, and this is why sleep is so deeply connected to emotional well-being. Not just as a form of rest, but as a kind of quiet emotional regulation, a nightly opportunity for your mind to return to what it has felt and gently bring it into balance. There is something else too that happens in this space, because as emotions are revisited, they are not simply replayed, they're often placed into new contexts, new combinations, new narratives. And through this, your mind explores possibilities. What if I had responded differently? What if this situation unfolded another way? What if this feeling led somewhere else? These questions are not asked directly. They're expressed through the shifting scenes of dreams, through symbolic moments, through encounters that feel meaningful, even if they do not make logical sense. And in this way, your mind becomes not just a processor of past experience, but a quiet simulator of future possibilities, a place where emotional patterns can be explored safely, where responses can be tested without consequence, where understanding can grow not through analysis but through experience. This may also explain why certain dreams linger, not because they were strange or vivid or dramatic, but because they touch something deeper, a feeling that had not yet found its place, a question that had not yet been answered, a part of you that needed to be acknowledged. And even if the details fade, the effect can remain. A subtle shift, a sense of clarity, or simply a feeling that something has settled. Of course, not all dreams feel gentle. Some can be intense, even unsettling. You may find yourself in situations that feel uncomfortable, confusing, or even frightening. But even these experiences can serve a purpose, because they allow your mind to engage with difficult emotions in a controlled way, to approach what feels overwhelming without being fully exposed to it. And in doing so, they create the possibility of transformation, a fear that can be faced, a tension that can be released, an experience that can be reworked, reshaped, understood differently. And while it may not always feel comfortable, it is still part of the same quiet process, the same gentle effort toward balance, toward integration, toward healing. So as the night continues, and your mind moves once more through these cycles of rest and dreaming, it is not simply resting, it is not simply creating stories, it is working in its own quiet way with everything you have felt, bringing it into alignment, allowing it to settle, preparing you softly for the next day. And as we continue, we begin to step even further beyond the personal layer of experience, into patterns that seem to appear not just within individuals, but across many minds, across cultures, across time. Because the more we look closely at dreams, the more they begin to reveal something that feels larger than the individual self. As your mind continues its quiet work through the night, sorting memories, softening emotions, weaving together fragments of experience, something else begins to appear. At first it may seem subtle, easy to overlook, but if you step back and look across many dreams, across many nights, even across many different people, a pattern begins to emerge, not just in what we dream, but in how we dream. You may have noticed this yourself, certain themes that return again and again, being chased, falling, flying, searching for something you cannot quite find, speaking to someone important only to realize they are not who you thought they were, or finding yourself in a place that feels familiar, even though you know you have never been there. These experiences are not unique to you. They are shared across cultures, across languages, across time. People who have never met, who have lived in completely different parts of the world, often describe dreams with remarkably similar patterns. Water that seems to represent emotion, heights that evoke freedom or fear, journeys that unfold without clear destinations. And this raises a quiet but powerful question. Why would different minds create such similar experiences? One of the first people to explore this question deeply was Carl Jung. Jung noticed that many of his patients described dreams filled with symbols they had never consciously encountered. Images that appeared again and again, not just in individual dreams, but across different people, different cultures, even different historical periods. To explain this, he proposed the idea of something he called the collective unconscious. Rather than thinking of the mind as entirely personal, built only from your own memories and experiences, Jung suggested that there might be a deeper layer, a shared layer, a kind of psychological foundation that all humans draw from, whether they are aware of it or not. Within this layer, he believed, exist patterns, archetypes, that shape the way we experience certain themes, not as fixed images, but as underlying structures. For example, the idea of a journey, the presence of a guide, the experience of transformation. These are not tied to any one culture. They appear in myths, in stories, and in dreams across the world. And in dreams, they often emerge spontaneously, without effort, without explanation. Now, whether or not one agrees with Jung's interpretation, the observation itself remains. Dreams are not entirely random. They're not just fragments thrown together without pattern. There is a kind of structure to them, a tendency for certain forms to appear, certain emotional landscapes to repeat. You might think of it like language. Each person speaks differently, with their own tone, their own style, their own vocabulary. And yet, beneath those differences, there is a shared structure, a grammar, a way of organizing meaning that allows communication to exist at all. Dreams may operate in a similar way. Each one is unique. Each one reflects the individual. But beneath that uniqueness, there may be a shared grammar of experience, a way of shaping images and emotions into something recognizable. And this becomes even more interesting when you consider how little control you have over these patterns. You do not decide to dream of falling. You do not choose to feel that sense of being chased. These experiences arise on their own, as if they are being generated from a place deeper than your conscious thoughts. And sometimes they carry a feeling of familiarity that is difficult to explain, a sense that you have been there before, not necessarily in waking life, but in some other way, as if the experience is tapping into something already known, even if you cannot place it. This sense of familiarity can be subtle, a place that feels like home, even though it is not, a person who feels significant, even though you do not recognize them, a moment that feels meaningful, even though you do not understand why. And this is where dreams begin to move beyond simple memory and emotion. They begin to touch something broader, something that feels less personal and more universal. Now, from a scientific perspective, there are ways to approach this. One explanation is that all human brains are structured in similar ways. We share similar bodies, similar sensory systems, similar ways of processing the world. So it makes sense that certain patterns would emerge naturally. Certain fears, certain desires, certain ways of interpreting experience, and this is certainly part of the picture. But even with this explanation, something remains intriguing, because the patterns in dreams are not always direct reflections of daily life. They often appear in symbolic form, abstract, layered, as if they're expressing something that is not easily put into words. And this symbolic quality is part of what makes dreams so compelling. They do not simply show you what happened, they transform it. They present it in a way that invites interpretation, rather than delivering clear answers. You might dream of being lost rather than remembering a moment of confusion. You might dream of water rising, rather than recalling a feeling of being overwhelmed. And through these symbols, your mind communicates in a different language, a quieter language, one that speaks through images and feelings, rather than direct explanation. And because this language is not tied to logic in the same way as waking thought, it can express things that are otherwise difficult to access, things that are felt more than understood. So as you move through your dreams night after night, you're not just revisiting your own experiences, you're participating in a broader pattern. A shared structure of imagery and emotion that connects individual minds in subtle ways. Not in a literal sense of shared space, but in the way certain themes continue to appear, again and again, across countless lives. And this invites another question. If dreams draw from patterns that are not entirely personal, then how much of what you experience in a dream truly belongs only to you? And how much might be part of something larger, something that many minds touch in their own way, each night? As the patterns of dreams begin to reveal themselves, shared shapes, familiar symbols, quiet echoes across different lives, there is another question that slowly begins to rise, a question that is easy to overlook, because it hides inside something we usually take for granted, the feeling of being you. During the day, this feeling is constant. You wake up and there is a sense of continuity. You remember who you are, where you are, what your life is. Your thoughts seem to belong to you. Your decisions feel like they come from you. There is a steady thread running through everything you experience, a quiet center that says, "This is happening to me." But when you enter a dream, something curious happens to that center. It does not always disappear completely, but it changes. Sometimes you are still yourself in a dream. You move through the environment, you think, you react, and there is a sense that you are the same person you were before you fell asleep. But other times, that sense begins to loosen. You may find yourself in a situation where your identity feels unclear. You are present, you are experiencing, but the usual details that define you are missing. You're not thinking about your name, you're not recalling your life. You are simply there, inside the experience. And in some dreams, the shift becomes even more pronounced. You may take on a different role entirely. You might be someone else, or not quite anyone at all. You might observe events as if you are part of them, but without a clear sense of personal identity attached. And yet, even in these moments, something remains. Experience continues. There is still seeing, feeling, sensing. But the self, as you normally understand it, is softer, less defined. This leads us to a quiet and somewhat surprising realization. This sense of self, the feeling of being a particular person with a particular story, is not always present for experience to occur. Experience can continue, even when the self becomes unclear. Now, this might seem strange at first, because we often think of the self as the center of everything, the one who experiences, the one who observes, the one who exists. But in dreams, that assumption begins to shift. Because if you can have an experience without a strong sense of self, then perhaps the self is not the source of experience. Perhaps it is something that arises within it, something that is usually there, but not always necessary. You might think of it like a character in a story. During the day, you're deeply identified with that character. You know their history, their preferences, their goals. Everything is organized around that identity. But in a dream, the story changes. The character may still be there, or it may transform, or it may fade entirely. And yet the story continues. Scenes unfold. Moments are experienced, even without a fixed main character. This suggests that the sense of self is more flexible than it appears, not a solid, unchanging core, but something that can expand, contract, or dissolve, depending on the state of the mind. And there is a particular state, often discussed in both science and contemplative traditions, where this becomes even more noticeable, a state where there are no clear images, no strong emotions, no narrative, and yet something like awareness remains. Not awareness of something specific, but awareness itself, quiet, open, without content. It is difficult to describe because the moment you try to think about it, the thinking mind returns and the simplicity is lost. But many people, especially those who spend time observing their own minds closely, have described moments like this. A kind of presence without identity, a sense of being without being anyone in particular. And this introduces a paradox. If experience can exist without a clearly defined self, then who or what is having the experience? It is a question that does not have a simple answer. And perhaps it is not meant to. Because the more we try to define it in precise terms, the more it slips away, like trying to hold on to something that changes the moment you grasp it. But even without answering the question fully, we can notice something important. The self is not as fixed as it feels. It is something that the mind constructs, maintains, and at times lets go of, and dreams offer a glimpse into that flexibility, a place where identity can shift, dissolve, and reform without effort. Now, from a scientific perspective, there are ways to describe parts of this process. Certain areas of the brain that help maintain a stable sense of identity become less active during dreaming. The systems that normally keep your experience organized around a consistent you are quieter, which allows for more fluid experiences, less constrained by a single perspective. But rather than focusing on those mechanisms, it may be more meaningful to stay with the experience itself. Because from the inside, what matters is not which part of the brain is active or inactive, but what it feels like. And what it feels like is this: you can exist in a state where experience continues, even as the sense of who you are becomes less clear. And this realization has quiet implications, because it suggests that what you call yourself may not be the foundation of experience, but one expression of it, one form that awareness takes during waking life, a useful form, a necessary form, but not the only one. So as you move through sleep each night, passing from clear identity into softer, more fluid states, you're not losing yourself. You're exploring different ways of being, different ways of experiencing, some with a strong sense of identity, some with a lighter one, and some where identity fades into something more open, more undefined. And as we continue, we begin to explore what happens when this flexibility meets something else, something that feels less like an internal construction and more like an environment, because there are moments in dreaming where the experience begins to feel not just created, but discovered. As the sense of self softens and shifts, And as your experience begins to feel less tied to a fixed identity, another question begins to take shape, quietly, almost in the background. If your mind can create experiences that feel this real, this complete, this immersive, then what exactly is a dream? Is it simply a simulation? A kind of internal world generated entirely by the brain? Or could it be something more? Not separate from the brain, but not limited to it either. To explore this gently, it may help to return to something simple. Think about how you experience the world when you're awake. It feels direct, immediate. You see the room around you, and it seems as though you're looking at reality itself. But in truth, what you're experiencing is a constructed version of reality. Light enters your eyes, is transformed into signals, and your brain interprets those signals as shapes, colours, depth, and movement. Sound travels through the air, becomes vibration, and is translated into voices, music, meaning. At every moment, your brain is building a model, detailed, responsive, continuously updated representation of the world, and you live inside that model. So even in waking life, you are already inside a kind of simulation, not a false one, but a constructed one, a translation of the external world into experience. Now, during sleep, something changes. The input from the outside becomes quiet. The flow of light, sound, and movement is reduced, but the system that creates experience does not stop. It continues to operate. Only now it begins to generate its own input, from memory, from emotion, from imagination. And the result is a world that feels just as real, because it is built using the same internal processes. This is why many scientists describe dreaming as a kind of simulation, a safe internal environment where the mind can explore, rehearse, and reorganize experiences without the constraints of physical reality. A place where scenarios can unfold freely, where outcomes can shift, where possibilities can be tested, and in many ways this explanation makes sense. It aligns with what we know about the brain. It explains why dreams often draw from familiar elements, why they reflect emotions, concerns, and experiences from waking life. But even within this explanation, something remains open. Because while we can describe how the experience is generated, we still do not fully understand why it feels the way it does, why it carries such depth, such presence, such a convincing sense of being there. And this is where another perspective begins to quietly appear, not as a replacement for the scientific view, but as an expansion of it. Some traditions suggest that what we experience in dreams is not only a simulation, but also a kind of access, a movement into a different layer of reality, not necessarily a physical place, but a different mode of experience, a different level of awareness. In this view, the brain is not only generating the dream, it is also shaping how that experience is perceived, like a lens or a filter, something that organizes and interprets what is encountered. To make this idea more approachable, imagine listening to music through a radio. The sound you hear depends on the device, the quality of the speaker, the clarity of the signal, the tuning of the receiver, but the signal itself is not created by the radio. It is received, and then shaped into something you can experience. Now, whether consciousness works in this way is still an open question. There is no clear evidence that awareness exists independently of the brain, but there are also aspects of experience that are not fully explained by current models. So for now, it remains a possibility, one of several ways to look at the same phenomenon. And what makes this possibility interesting is not that it claims certainty, but that it invites curiosity. Because when you are inside a dream, it does not feel like a simulation. It feels like an environment, a space that surrounds you, a place you move through, interact with, respond to. And sometimes that environment behaves in ways that are unexpected, not entirely under your control, not entirely predictable. You may encounter situations that surprise you, conversations that unfold in ways you did not anticipate, moments that feel as though they're happening to you, rather than being created by you. And this raises a subtle question. If a dream were entirely under your control, entirely generated by your conscious intention, would it not feel more predictable, more directed, more like something you're actively creating? But often, it does not feel that way. It feels as though you're participating in something rather than designing it. And this does not necessarily mean that the experience comes from outside the brain, but it does suggest that the process of creating experience is more complex than simple control. That there are layers within the mind, processes unfolding beneath awareness that contribute to what you experience. And whether we describe this as simulation or as access to another layer, the effect is similar. You enter a space that feels real. You move through it. You interact with it. You're shaped by it. And when you leave, something of that experience remains, even if you cannot fully describe it, even if it fades quickly, even if it feels just out of reach. So perhaps the question is not which explanation is correct, simulation or something beyond it. Perhaps the more useful question is this: what does it mean that your mind can create or enter experiences that feel this complete? What does it reveal about the nature of reality, that your sense of being somewhere can arise in more than one way? And what does it suggest about consciousness itself, that it can move so fluidly between these different modes of experience? As the night continues, and as you move once more through these cycles of rest and dreaming, you are not just revisiting your day. You're stepping into something that challenges the boundary between internal and external, between constructed and discovered, between what is created and what is experienced. And as we continue, we will begin to explore how different traditions across time and culture have tried to understand this journey, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a path to observe, to learn from, and perhaps to gently explore. Long before quiet rooms filled with instruments and glowing screens began to observe the sleeping brain, people were already watching something else, not the brain itself, but the experience, the feeling of leaving the waking world behind and entering somewhere unfamiliar yet strangely meaningful. Across different times and places, people notice the same quiet mystery. You fall asleep, your body remains where it is, and yet your experience changes completely. You move through places, you meet figures, you receive impressions that feel important, even if you do not fully understand them. And so, naturally, a question began to form. If the body stays, then where does the experience go? Without the language of modern science, people turned to the tools they had: stories, symbols, and careful observation of their own inner lives. And what they created were not explanations in the scientific sense, but interpretations, ways of making sense of something deeply familiar yet difficult to describe. In ancient Egypt, dreams were often seen as a kind of message, not random, not meaningless, but purposeful. There were places known as dream temples, where individuals would go specifically to sleep, not simply to rest, but to receive guidance. They believed that during sleep, the boundary between the human world and something beyond it became thinner, more open, and in that openness, communication could occur. A dream might carry insight, a warning, a suggestion, not always clear, not always literal, but meaningful. And because of this, dreams were treated with a certain respect, not as illusions to be dismissed, but as experiences worth paying attention to. If we move to ancient Greece, we find something similar, though expressed in a slightly different way. Dreams were often associated with the idea of messages from the divine. There were individuals known for their ability to interpret dreams, people who would listen carefully to what someone had experienced during the night and attempt to understand its meaning. Again, not in a strict logical sense, but in a symbolic one. A dream of water might reflect emotion. A journey might reflect a change in life. A figure encountered in a dream might represent something within or something beyond. What matters here is not whether these interpretations were correct in a literal sense. What matters is that people recognized something important. Dreams were not empty. They carried a sense of significance, a feeling that what was happening during sleep was not simply random noise, but part of a larger process. And this idea appears again and again across different cultures. In some traditions, dreams were seen as journeys, in others as conversations, in others still as reflections of deeper layers of the mind or spirit, different languages, different symbols, but a similar intuition that sleep was not just the absence of waking, but the presence of something else. Now, as time moved forward, the way people understood dreams began to shift. With the development of psychology, dreams were no longer seen primarily as messages from outside, but as expressions from within. Rather than asking, "What is this dream telling me from beyond?" the question became, "What is this dream revealing about me?" Thinkers like Sigmund Freud suggested that dreams were connected to hidden desires, thoughts and feelings that were not fully expressed during waking life. Dreams, in this view, became a kind of indirect language, a way for the mind to express what it could not say openly. Later, others, including Carl Jung, expanded this idea, not just focusing on personal experience, but suggesting that dreams might connect to deeper, shared patterns within the human mind, symbols that appear across cultures, themes that repeat across individuals. In this way, the understanding of dreams began to move from the divine to the psychological, from messages sent to meanings emerging. And then, more recently, science introduced yet another perspective. Instead of focusing on meaning or symbolism, it began to look at mechanism. What is the brain doing during sleep? Which parts are active? How do patterns of activity relate to memory, emotion, and perception? And through this lens, dreams became something else again. Not messages, not hidden desires, but processes, ways the brain organizes information, rehearses experiences, maintains balance. Each of these perspectives, ancient, psychological, scientific, offers something valuable, but none of them fully replaces the others. Because each one is looking at the same experience from a different angle, the ancient view asks, "What does this experience mean?" The psychological view asks, "What does this reveal about the mind?" The scientific view asks, "How does this happen?" And perhaps the most interesting thing is that these questions do not cancel each other out. They exist side by side, like different ways of describing the same landscape. If you stand in one place, you see one view. If you move a little further, you see another. And neither is wrong. They are simply incomplete on their own. So when we look at dreams, we can hold these perspectives gently, without needing to choose one over the others. We can recognize that science offers clarity about the mechanisms, that psychology offers insight into meaning, and that ancient traditions offer a sense of wonder, a way of relating to the experience that feels personal, human, and deeply rooted in history. And perhaps this combination, this quiet layering of perspectives, is what makes dreams so enduring, so difficult to fully define, so resistant to simple explanation. Because they exist at the intersection of many things: biology and experience, memory and imagination, structure and mystery. And as you continue to drift through the night, moving between these layers again and again, you are participating in something that humans have been noticing, wondering about, and trying to understand for thousands of years. Not always in the same way, not always with the same conclusions, but always with the same quiet curiosity. What is this place we go to when we sleep? And what, if anything, does it reveal about us? As human curiosity continued to circle around the mystery of sleep and dreams, some thinkers began to describe the experience in a different way. Not only as symbols, not only as messages, but as movement, a gentle shifting of awareness from one layer of experience into another. Among those who explored this idea was Rudolf Steiner, who suggested that what we call a human being is not limited to the physical body alone. Rather than presenting this as a fact, it may be more helpful to imagine it as a model, a way of describing experience through a different lens. In this model, the human being is composed of several layers. The physical body, which you are familiar with, the one that rests in bed, breathes steadily, and remains in place throughout the night. But alongside it, Steiner described more subtle layers, sometimes referred to as an energy body, or a feeling body, or something even more difficult to name, something closer to awareness itself. And within this framework, sleep was not simply a shutdown of activity. It was a separation, not a dramatic one, not something visible, but a gentle loosening. As if part of your experience, part of what you are, steps slightly away from the physical form while the body remains at rest. To understand this more comfortably, it helps to think in terms of experience rather than structure. During the day, your awareness feels closely tied to your body. You move, and the world responds. You see through your eyes, hear through your ears, act through your muscles. Everything feels anchored. But during sleep, that anchoring softens. You no longer feel the weight of your body in the same way. You no longer respond to the physical environment. Instead, your experience shifts inward, or perhaps elsewhere. In this state, it can feel as though your awareness is no longer centered in the body, not gone, not disconnected completely, but less fixed, more fluid. And this is where the idea of an astral body begins to take shape, not as a physical object, but as a way of describing the feeling that your experience is no longer limited to your physical location, that you can move, see, interact without your body moving at all. You've already encountered this in a way. Every time you dream, you walk through places, you interact with environments, you encounter others, and yet your physical body remains still. From a scientific perspective, this is explained as internal simulation, the brain creating an immersive experience. And this explanation is both useful and important. But the model we are exploring here suggests a different emphasis. Not that the experience is unreal, but that it reflects a shift in how awareness is organized. That what you're experiencing may feel like movement, because in some sense it is. Not movement through physical space, but movement through layers of experience. Some traditions describe this connection between the physical body and this more fluid aspect of awareness using a metaphor. A kind of thread, not visible, not measurable, but present. A link that remains even as the experience changes, so that no matter how far the dream seems to take you, there's always a way back. Now, it is important to remain gentle here. There is no scientific evidence that such a thread exists in a literal sense, but as a metaphor it captures something familiar. The feeling that no matter how deep or immersive a dream becomes, you eventually return, you wake, you reconnect with the body, the room, the world you left behind, and everything aligns again. What makes this perspective interesting is not whether it is literally true, but how closely it mirrors the experience itself. Because when you are dreaming, it often does feel as though you are somewhere else, not imagining a place, but inhabiting one. And this feeling has been reported across many cultures, across many different systems of thought, not always in the same language, not always with the same details, but with a shared sense that sleep involves a kind of movement, a shifting of awareness into a different mode of experience. Now, from a modern perspective, we might say that this movement is entirely internal, that the brain is generating these environments, these sensations, these interactions, and that may well be the case. But even within that understanding, the experience remains. The feeling of leaving, the sensation of arriving, the sense of being present somewhere that is not here. And this is where these older models continue to hold a certain value, not as literal descriptions of physical reality, but as ways of pointing towards something difficult to describe, a language for experience, a way of acknowledging that what happens during sleep is not just the absence of waking life, but the presence of something else, something that feels active, dynamic, engaging, and perhaps in its own way, meaningful. So as you move through sleep each night, passing from the stillness of the body into the movement of dreams, you might begin to notice this shift more gently, not as a sudden transition, but as a gradual change in how your awareness is held, less anchored, more fluid, less defined by the physical world, more open to something else. And whether we describe this as a function of the brain or as a movement of something beyond it, the experience itself remains the same. You close your eyes, you let go, and somewhere along the way, you begin to feel as though you're no longer entirely here. As different cultures and thinkers tried to understand what happens during sleep, many arrived at a similar idea. Not identical in detail, not expressed in the same language, but similar in structure. They began to describe reality itself as layered, not just one continuous world, but multiple levels of experience, each with its own qualities, its own rules, its own way of being perceived. And within this view, dreaming was not simply imagination. It was movement between layers, a shift in the way awareness engages with experience. One way to approach this idea is to imagine reality as something like a landscape with different levels of depth. During the day, your attention is focused on the surface, the physical world, the objects you can touch, the sounds you can hear, the space you move through. Everything feels solid, consistent, shared. But as you fall asleep, your awareness begins to withdraw from that surface. Not completely, but enough that another layer begins to come into focus. At first, this layer appears as fragments, images, sensations, moments that do not quite connect. But as the night deepens, these fragments organize themselves into something more complete. Environments, scenes, experiences that feel immersive, even though they are not bound by the same rules as the physical world. Some traditions describe this as entering a different plane of experience. Again, it helps to keep this idea gentle, not as a literal place floating somewhere beyond the physical world, but as a way of describing the shift in how experience is structured. These descriptions, there are often distinctions made between different kinds of dream states. Some are considered closer to ordinary dreaming, more chaotic, more fragmented, less stable. Others are described as clearer, more coherent, more structured, as if the experience itself becomes more refined, more organized, more consistent. You may have noticed something like this in your own experience. Some dreams feel scattered. They shift quickly, changing from one scene to another without clear connection. While others feel continuous, you remain in one place. events unfold with a sense of progression. There is a feeling of being somewhere rather than just passing through images. This difference in quality has led some traditions to suggest that not all dream states are the same, that there are layers even within dreaming itself. Different levels of clarity, different levels of awareness. In certain contemplative practices, especially within Tibetan traditions, there is a particular focus on becoming aware during the dream, not controlling it, not changing it, but simply recognizing while the dream is happening that you are dreaming. This state is often approached slowly, gently, through practices that involve observing the mind, both during the day and before sleep. Over time, some individuals report moments where, within the dream, a shift occurs, a recognition, a quiet awareness that the experience is unfolding within the mind. And when that recognition happens, the quality of the dream can change. It may become more stable, more vivid, more intentional. Not because the environment becomes more real, but because awareness becomes more present within it. Now, from a scientific perspective, this phenomenon is known and studied. It is often referred to as lucid dreaming, a state where a person becomes aware that they are dreaming while still inside the dream. But beyond the scientific description, the experience itself can feel quite remarkable because it introduces a new layer, not just dreaming, but being aware within the dream, and this awareness can vary. Sometimes it is brief, a moment of recognition before the dream fades. Other times, it can remain for longer, allowing the dream to unfold with a different kind of clarity. And in these moments, the boundary between observer and experience becomes more fluid. You're both inside the dream and aware of it, participating and observing. Now, if we step back again, something interesting begins to take shape. Across different traditions, across different perspectives, there is a recurring idea. That experience is not limited to a single layer. That awareness can move, shift, and reorganize itself in different ways. During waking life, it is focused outward. During dreaming, it turns inward, and in certain states, it becomes aware of itself. Not through thought, but through direct experience. And whether we describe these as layers, or states, or simply different modes of perception, the pattern remains, experience changes, awareness adapts. Reality as it is felt is not fixed, it is dynamic, responsive, shaped by how the mind engages with it. Now, it is important to remain balanced here. There is no scientific evidence that these layers exist as separate physical realms. There is no clear boundary in the external world that corresponds to these descriptions. But as ways of understanding experience, as ways of describing how awareness shifts during sleep, they offer something valuable. They provide language, structure, a way of pointing towards something that is otherwise difficult to describe. Because when you are inside a dream, especially one that feels stable and immersive, it does not feel like fragments. It feels like a place with its own sense of continuity, its own internal logic, its own atmosphere. And while that place may not exist in the physical sense, the experience of being there is real, and that experience is what these traditions are trying to describe. Not a map of the external world, but a map of experience itself. So as you continue to move through sleep, night after night, passing through these different states, you're not just drifting randomly, you're moving through layers of experience, some light, some deep, some fragmented, some clear. And occasionally perhaps you may find yourself in a moment where awareness becomes just a little more present, a little more steady, a little more aware of itself. And in that moment, the experience changes again. Not because the world has changed, but because the way you're experiencing it has shifted. And as we continue, we begin to explore something even more uncertain. Moments where dreams seem to reach beyond memory, beyond emotion, into something that feels almost as if it knows more than it should. As your mind continues its quiet journey through the night, moving between memory, emotion, and imagination, there are moments that feel slightly different. Not every dream, not every night, but occasionally. A dream that lingers, a dream that feels as though it carries something more than the usual fragments of your day. At first, it may seem like any other experience. A scene unfolds, you move through it, you feel, you respond, you observe. But when you wake, something stays with you. A sense that the dream was not just a reflection of what has already happened, but perhaps something else. Something that feels almost as though it reaches beyond the present moment. Now, it is important to move gently here, because this is an area where experience and interpretation can easily blend together, and our goal is not to make strong claims, but to observe carefully, to notice what people have reported, and to consider it with quiet curiosity. Some individuals describe dreams that seem to anticipate events, not in a clear or literal way, not as exact predictions, but as impressions, images, feelings, that later appear to connect in some way to something that happens afterward. You might dream of a place you have never visited, and later find yourself in a location that feels strikingly familiar. You might dream of a conversation, and later experience something that echoes that same tone, that same emotional pattern. In many cases, these connections are subtle, loose, open to interpretation, and this is where caution becomes important, because the human mind is very good at finding patterns, at connecting dots, at weaving together experiences in ways that create meaning. Sometimes, what feels like foresight may simply be the mind recognizing similarities after the fact, a kind of retrospective connection, where we look back and say, this feels familiar, even if the details are not exactly the same. This does not make the experience any less interesting, but it reminds us to hold it lightly, to allow for multiple possibilities. On the one hand, dreams are deeply connected to memory and emotion. They draw from what you have experienced, what you have felt, what you have noticed, often without realizing it. Your mind may pick up on subtle cues during the day, small details, patterns, tones in conversation, and during sleep, it may weave these together into scenarios that feel meaningful. So when something later resembles that dream, it can feel as though the dream knew in advance, when in fact, it may have been working with information already available, but not yet fully conscious. On the other hand, there are moments that feel hard to explain, experiences that do not seem to connect clearly to prior knowledge, dreams that carry a quality of insight that feels unexpected, and while these are more difficult to interpret, they are also part of the human experience. Across cultures, across time, people have reported dreams that feel significant in this way. Not necessarily predictive in a strict sense, but meaningful, as if they reveal something just beyond ordinary awareness. Now, science approaches this carefully. Rather than assuming that dreams can predict the future, researchers often look at how the brain processes information, how it combines memory, emotion, and expectation to create scenarios, how it explores possibilities. In this view, dreams are not about predicting what will happen, but about preparing for what might happen. They simulate different outcomes, different responses, different emotional landscapes, and through this simulation, the mind becomes more flexible, more adaptable, better able to respond when new situations arise. So when something in waking life resembles a dream, it may feel as though the dream anticipated it, but it may simply be that the mind had already explored that possibility, quietly, internally, before it appeared in the external world. And yet, even with this understanding, the experience itself remains. The feeling of recognition, the sense of connection, the impression that something in the dream carried a kind of knowing, and rather than dismissing this entirely or accepting it without question, it may be more helpful to stay with the experience itself, to notice how it feels, to observe it without rushing to explain it. Because what matters in this context is not whether dreams can truly foresee events, but what these experiences reveal about the mind. They show that your mind is not limited to the present moment. It is constantly working with possibilities, drawing from memory, from pattern, from subtle perception, exploring different ways the future might unfold, not in a fixed or determined way, but in a fluid, open-ended way. And this capacity to imagine, to simulate, to anticipate, is one of the quiet strengths of the human mind. It allows you to navigate uncertainty, to prepare without even realizing it for what may come. So when a dream feels as though it knows more, it may not be reaching into the future, but it may be revealing just how deeply your mind is already engaged with the present, how much it is observing, processing, and exploring beneath the surface of awareness. And perhaps, in those moments, what you're sensing is not a prediction, but a reflection of how much your mind already understands, quietly, gently, beyond words. And as we continue, we move into experiences that feel even more unusual, moments where the boundary between body and awareness seems to shift more dramatically, where people describe not just being somewhere else in a dream, but feeling quite vividly, as though they are no longer confined to the body at all. As the night deepens and your awareness continues its quiet movement through different states, there are certain experiences that feel even more unusual, not just vivid, not just emotional, but almost as if the usual boundaries of the body have softened or momentarily disappeared. Some people describe moments, often at the edge of sleep or just as they begin to wake, where they feel as though they are no longer located inside their physical body. It does not always come with a clear image. Sometimes it is simply a sensation, a lightness, a sense of floating, as if the weight that usually anchors you is gently lifted. Other times the experience becomes more detailed, a feeling of rising above the body, of observing the room from a different perspective, of moving through space without effort. And yet, during all of this, the physical body remains still, resting, unmoving. These experiences are often described as out-of-body moments, but rather than focusing on the label, it may be more helpful to stay with the feeling itself. Because what is most striking is not the idea of leaving the body, but the shift in perspective, the sense that awareness is no longer centered in its usual place. Now, there are times when similar sensations occur during the transition into sleep. You may feel as though you are sinking into the bed or floating just above it. You might sense movement, even though your body has not moved at all. These moments can feel surprisingly real, not imagined, not distant, but immediate, present. From a scientific point of view, these experiences are often connected to the way the brain manages the body's position and movement. There are systems in the brain that constantly track where your body is, how it is oriented, how it relates to the space around it. During the transition into sleep, these systems can become less stable. Signals shift. The usual alignment between body and awareness becomes less precise. And as a result, your sense of location can change. You may feel as though you are moving, even when you're not. Or that your point of awareness has shifted, even though your body remains in place. In addition, During certain phases of sleep, your body naturally enters a state of deep stillness, protective state, where movement is gently inhibited so that you do not physically act out your dreams. If your awareness becomes active while your body is still in this state, the contrast can feel striking. Your mind is alert, your experience is vivid, but your body does not respond. And this combination can create a powerful impression, a feeling of separation, as if awareness and body are no longer fully aligned. Now, alongside these physiological explanations, there are also many personal reports, people who describe these experiences in detail, across different cultures, different backgrounds, different times. Some describe floating above their body, others describe moving through familiar environments. Some report observing scenes from perspectives they would not normally have, and while these accounts are consistent in certain ways, they remain difficult to verify in a controlled scientific sense. Which brings us back to the importance of balance, because while the experience itself can feel very real, interpreting what it means requires care. On one side, we have the scientific understanding that these experiences can arise from changes in how the brain processes body awareness, movement, and perception. That the feeling of leaving the body may be generated internally through shifts in these systems. On the other side, we have the subjective experience, the vividness, the clarity, the sense that something unusual has occurred. And both of these can be held at the same time, without needing to force a single conclusion. Because what matters in this exploration is not deciding whether awareness truly leaves the body, but understanding how flexible the experience of being in the body can be, how something that feels so fixed during the day can become fluid during the night. You're used to feeling located behind your eyes, within your body, anchored to a specific point in space. But these experiences suggest that this sense of location is not permanent, it is constructed, maintained, and under certain conditions it can shift, sometimes gently, sometimes dramatically. Now, there are also reports of awareness during states where the body is deeply unresponsive, moments where individuals later on describe having had experiences while outwardly appearing unconscious. These accounts are often complex and they vary widely. Some are connected to medical situations, others to deep states of rest or altered awareness, and while they are difficult to study in a controlled way, they add another layer to the question, because they suggest that awareness may not always follow the patterns we expect, that the relationship between the body and experience is not always straightforward. Again, this does not lead to a simple conclusion, but it does invite a deeper appreciation for how much we still do not fully understand. And perhaps that is part of what makes these experiences so compelling, not because they provide clear answers, but because they reveal how much possibility exists within something as familiar as sleep. So as you move through the night, drifting in and out of different states, you may occasionally brush against these moments, a sense of floating, a shift in perspective, a brief feeling that you're not entirely where you thought you were, and whether these moments are interpreted as internal processes or something more. They point to the same quiet truth, that your experience of yourself, your sense of being located, defined, contained, is more flexible than it appears. And as we continue, we will explore a state where this flexibility becomes something you can begin to notice more clearly, not by accident, but with awareness. A state where, even within the dream, you begin to realize that you are dreaming. As your awareness moves through the night, shifting between stillness, imagery, emotion, and occasional moments of disorientation, there is a particular state that feels different from all the others, not because the dream becomes more vivid, but because something within you becomes more aware. It often begins quietly. You're already inside a dream, walking, speaking, experiencing the unfolding scene just as you always do. And then, something feels slightly off, not dramatically wrong, just unusual enough to catch your attention. Perhaps the lighting feels different, or a place seems familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, or an event unfolds in a way that does not quite follow the usual patterns of waking life. And in that moment a thought appears, simple, soft, almost curious. This might be a dream. If that thought passes quickly, the dream continues as before. But if it lingers, if awareness settles into that recognition, something changes. You're still inside the dream, the environment is still there, the scene continues, but now you are aware of it in a new way. You're not just experiencing the dream, you know that you are dreaming. This state is often called lucid dreaming, and unlike many of the experiences we have explored, this one has been studied directly. Researchers have observed that individuals in this state can communicate in a limited way from within the dream, not through speech or movement, but through patterns of eye movement, signals that can be detected even while the body remains asleep. This provides a gentle confirmation that awareness can remain active within the dream even as the body rests. But beyond the scientific observation, the experience itself is what makes this state so interesting, because it reveals something subtle about awareness, that it can exist at different levels. At the same time, you're inside the dream and aware of it, participating and observing. And this dual awareness can feel quite unique. At times, it brings a sense of clarity. The environment may appear more stable, more detailed. You may notice textures, colours, movement in a way that feels sharper than usual, not because the dream is more real, but because your awareness within it is more present. At other times, the experience can feel delicate. The moment you become too focused, too intent on controlling or analysing the dream, it may begin to fade, as if the awareness itself changes the balance of the experience. And this introduces an important distinction. There are different ways of being aware within a dream. In some cases, people try to control the experience, to change the environment, to direct the events, to explore freely, and this can be possible to a degree. But there is another approach, a quieter one, where awareness is present, but not controlling, observing rather than directing, allowing the dream to unfold while remaining gently aware of it. And this form of awareness often feels more stable, more natural, less disruptive to the experience. It is not about shaping the dream, but about being present within it. Now, how does this state arise? In some cases, it happens spontaneously. A moment of recognition appears without effort. But in other cases, it can be approached gradually, through simple practices, not techniques in a strict sense, but habits of attention. For example, during the day, you might occasionally pause and ask yourself a gentle question. Am I dreaming, or am I awake? Not in a way that creates doubt, but in a way that increases awareness. Over time, this habit can carry into the dream, and when that question arises within the dream itself, it can lead to that moment of recognition. Similarly, paying attention to your dreams, remembering them, reflecting on them, can make the experience of dreaming more familiar, more accessible, so that when you are inside a dream, there is a greater chance of noticing it. But even without any deliberate effort, this state offers something important. It shows that awareness is not simply on or off. It is not something that disappears during sleep and returns upon waking. It can remain in different forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes active, sometimes aware of itself. And this has gentle implications, because it suggests that consciousness, the experience of being aware, may not be tied to a single state. It moves, it adapts, it shifts between different modes of experience, waking, dreaming, deep rest, and sometimes aware within dreaming. Now, it is important not to place too much weight on this. Lucid dreaming is not necessary for sleep to be meaningful. It is not a goal that must be achieved. For many people, it remains an occasional or even rare experience, and that is perfectly natural, because the value of this state is not in how often it occurs, but in what it reveals, that even within a dream, awareness can recognize itself. Even within a constructed experience, there can be a sense of presence that is not fully absorbed by the scene, and this recognition, however brief, offers a glimpse into something deeper, a way of seeing that experience and awareness are not the same, that you can be inside an experience and still be aware of it. And perhaps this insight extends beyond dreams into waking life as well. Because just as you can become aware within a dream, you can become aware within your thoughts, your emotions, your daily experiences, not separate from them, but not completely lost within them either. And in this way, lucid dreaming becomes more than just an unusual state during sleep. It becomes a gentle reminder that awareness can notice itself, that experience can be observed even as it unfolds, and that this quiet recognition can arise in more than one place. So as the night continues, and as your awareness moves once more through its familiar rhythms, you may not notice this state every time, but knowing that it exists, that it is possible, adds another layer to the journey, another way of understanding what happens when you sleep, not just as rest, not just as dreaming, but as a spectrum of awareness, shifting, unfolding, and at times quietly recognizing itself. And as we come closer to the end of this exploration, we begin to gather these threads together, science, experience, tradition, into something softer, not a final answer, but a way of holding all of this, gently, at once. And now, as the night gently begins to lean toward a morning, there is a quiet sense of return, not a sudden shift, not a sharp awakening, but a gradual re-emergence. Your breathing becomes a little more responsive, your body begins to reconnect with its surroundings, and somewhere within that soft transition, your awareness rises again, toward the familiar shape of waking life. But before that return fully settles, it is worth pausing, just for a moment, to gather what we have explored, not as conclusions, not as fixed answers, but as a collection of perspectives, each offering a different way of looking at the same quiet journey. From science, we have learned that sleep is not an absence. It is an active, carefully structured process. Your brain moves through cycles, your body restores itself, your mind reorganizes memory, processes emotion, and explores possibilities. Dreams, in this view, are not random. They are part of a system, one that helps you learn, adapt, and maintain balance. And this understanding is grounded, observable, carefully studied. At the same time, from experience, we have seen that what happens during sleep does not always feel like a simple process. It feels immersive, convincing, sometimes even meaningful in ways that are difficult to explain. You enter environments, you move through scenes, you feel emotions that are vivid, sometimes even more intense than those of waking life. And while science can describe the mechanisms behind these experiences, the feeling of being inside them remains something deeply personal, something that can only be known from within. Then, from tradition, we encountered another way of understanding, one that does not focus on mechanism, but on meaning. Across cultures, people have described sleep as a kind of journey, not necessarily a physical movement, but a shift in awareness, a transition from one mode of experience to another. Some spoke of messages, some of deeper layers of the mind, some of subtle forms of the self moving beyond the body. And while these ideas are not confirmed in a scientific sense, they reflect something important. They reflect how humans have tried to understand an experience that feels, in many ways, larger than simple explanation. So where does this leave us? With three perspectives: science, which explains how; experience, which reveals what it feels like; and tradition, which explores what it might mean. And rather than choosing one over the others, it may be more helpful to hold them together, gently, because they are not necessarily in conflict. They are simply describing different aspects of the same phenomenon. Imagine for a moment looking at a landscape. From one angle you see the structure, the shape of the land, the patterns, the physical details. From another you feel the atmosphere, the light, the movement, the sense of space. And from yet another you reflect on what it means to you, how it connects to memory, to emotion, to understanding. The landscape has not changed, only your perspective has. Sleep may be something like this, a single process, experienced in multiple ways, understood through different lenses, each one incomplete on its own, but richer when considered together. And within this there is a quiet insight, something simple, but easy to overlook. Every night you leave the waking world, not completely, not permanently, but enough that your experience transforms. You move through different states, you enter environments that feel real, you process what you have lived, you explore possibilities, and then you return. And this happens so often, so naturally, that it becomes invisible. But when you pause to notice it, it is quite extraordinary, because it suggests that your awareness is not fixed. It is not limited to a single way of experiencing. It can move, shift, adapt from structured logical thought to fluid, symbolic dreaming, to quiet, contentless stillness, and sometimes even to awareness within the dream itself. And perhaps the most important part is not where you go, not whether dreams are simulations or reflections or something more, but that this movement exists at all, that your mind has the ability to enter these different states, to explore them, to return from them, and to carry something back, even if you do not always remember what it is, because even when the details fade, the effects remain. A memory strengthened, an emotion softened, a perspective shifted, just slightly, a sense of clarity that was not there before. And this is why sleep matters, not just for the body, but for the mind, for the quiet integration of everything you have experienced, for the gentle balancing of what you have felt, for the subtle preparation for what comes next. So as you continue through your nights, whether you remember your dreams or not, whether they feel vivid or quiet, meaningful or fleeting, you're still making this journey. You're still moving through these layers. You're still participating in something that is both deeply biological and deeply experiential. And perhaps, over time, you may begin to notice it more, not in a way that disrupts your rest, but in a way that adds a quiet sense of curiosity, a gentle awareness of the transitions, the shifts, the moments where the familiar begins to soften and something else begins to emerge. And so, as we reach the end of tonight's exploration, there is no need to arrive at a final answer, no need to decide exactly where your consciousness goes, because the question itself is part of the journey, and sometimes it is enough simply to notice that each night you step away from the world you know and into something that continues to unfold quietly beyond the edge of waking. And so, we've reached the end of tonight's exploration. Whether your eyes are still open or you're already floating somewhere between waking and dreaming, thank you for being part of this little journey. If you'd like to join me again for more gentle wanderings, You're always welcome to subscribe or share this with someone who could use a peaceful pause. Time has a way of slipping through our fingers, but here, in this quiet moment, it's just you and the soft hush of rest. Sleep peacefully wherever and whenever you may be.